Welcome to the Scottish Rite Journal podcast, an audio presentation of the Scottish Rite Journal, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. This week's article is A Brief History of the Supreme Council White House Visitations by Brother B. Chris Ruley, 32nd degree, KCCH, and comes from the January-February 2024 issue of the Scottish Rite Journal. On the evening of April 22, 1866, President Andrew Johnson arrived at the stately Metropolitan Hotel in Washington, D.C. to attend a private Masonic banquet. Johnson gathered at the festive board with several Masons who had united their fortunes with that of the Southern Confederacy, and who had shown a cordial dislike and ill feeling towards the president, as one eyewitness later recalled. The anxieties and frustrations of the political world dissipated as the evening progressed. The spirit of rancor and bitterness engendered by the war seemed to be entirely forgotten, as common bonds of fraternal fellowship proved stronger than any political affiliation. Johnson rose to thank his hosts towards the end of the evening and invited the Supreme Council to visit the White House the next morning and reciprocate the courtesies extended to him. Johnson's invitation, made with a renewed spirit of fraternal camaraderie and cooperation, established a unique tradition of routine visits to the White House, which extended into the late 20th century. Grand Commander Albert Pike, 33rd degree, appeared anxious to visit the White House with other members of the Supreme Council the next morning. Pike's legal troubles persisted after the Civil War, despite a pardon from Johnson that had been secured by his colleague and District of Columbia Sovereign Grand Inspector General Benjamin B. French, a past Grand Master of Washington, D.C., and member of Johnson's White House Inner Circle. Pike hung back as we were about to enter, recalled SGIG of Missouri Martin Collins, 33rd degree, and seemed almost to regret the call. Nevertheless, they all entered and, to Pike's relief, the visit turned out to be very pleasant. Just as the guests left, Johnson handed Pike a sealed envelope, which Pike thrust into his pocket and did not open until long after they had left the White House. It contained a second, more complete pardon, which relieved Pike of his troubles and enabled him to focus on the growth of the Scottish Rite. William McKinley became the first president and second Masonic president to welcome the Supreme Council on more than one occasion to the White House. Both events, on October 27, 1897 and October 23, 1899, occurred during the Supreme Council's biennial sessions in Washington. Council members boarded carriages early in the morning and, upon arriving at the White House, were ushered into a private room to wait for the president. McKinley arrived moments later and was later introduced by Lieutenant Grand Commander illustrious James D. Richardson, 33rd degree of Tennessee, who also served as a state representative in Congress. Richardson effectively took over the unofficial position of White House liaison after Benjamin B. French's death in August 1870. The president greeted each one cordially, and at the close of the introductions made a few pleasant and choice remarks appropriate to the occasion. A full list of attendees can be found in the Supreme Council's transactions for 1897. McKinley's successor, Theodore Roosevelt, hosted the Supreme Council on 4 separate occasions: October 26, 1901, October 22, 1903, October 16, 1905, and October 26, 1907. The President appeared, and after a statement by the Grand Commander to the effect that the Supreme Council had called in conformity to a custom with them to pay their respects to him as the Chief Executive, and after the expression by the President of the pleasure gave him to receive the Supreme Council, each officer of the Council and member of the Rite was introduced to him by the Grand Commander, and each was given a kindly greeting. William H. Taft's busy travel schedule prevented him from meeting the Supreme Council during their October 1911 session, but he did approve a request for Masons in federal employment to participate in the House of the Temple dedication ceremony on October 18, 1911, with an excused absence. Woodrow Wilson's running mate, Vice President Thomas Marshall, served as the fraternity's patron during most of Wilson's administration. Marshall, an active member of the Supreme Council in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, led his support to the Southern jurisdiction whenever possible. On April 9, 1913, for example, he accepted an invitation to attend a special dinner organized by Richardson, composed of Masons in Congress. Although we come together as adherent of different political organizations, Richardson said at the beginning of the event, I trust we all realize that above all the clamor of partisan politics, the calm voice of Scottish Rite Masonry is always to be heard, and that we are endeavoring to make her ennobling principles triumphant. Despite Wilson's busy schedule, he received the Supreme Council on one occasion, October 23, 1913. In December 1916, Richardson's successor, illustrious George Moore, 33rd degree, wrote to Wilson on behalf of the Council, reassuring the President of their support during the war effort. Wilson's reply was recorded in the 1917 Transactions. Senator Oscar W. Underwood has handed me the letter you were kind enough to send me, to offer your services to me to aid in bringing about peace. I want you and those associated with you to know how highly I appreciate the offer and how glad I will be to avail myself of it if any proper occasion should seem to present itself. Cordially and sincerely yours, Woodrow Wilson. White House visits by the Supreme Council continued through the ensuing Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Truman administrations. Visits sometimes included a brief photo op with the President on the White House grounds. On October 19, 1945, President Harry S. Truman, past Grand Master of Missouri, became the first president to receive the 33rd degree. While the White House underwent extensive renovations to its interior, Truman welcomed Supreme Council members to Blair House, his temporary office and residence. First Lady Bess Truman held a special luncheon for the Council's spouses at the Army-Navy Club on October 21, 1949. White House visits became less frequent following Truman's administration. Dwight D. Eisenhower welcomed the Council only once on October 23, 1957. John F. Kennedy received an international delegation of Scottish Rite Masons to the White House on April 10, 1961, as part of the International Conference of Supreme Councils. Kennedy thanked the delegation for their efforts. When my good friend, Congressman Wayne Aspinall of Colorado, said he would have his friends in town, Kennedy said to the crowd, I said I would like to meet with his friends. You are to be congratulated on your aims. President Nixon received the Council and provided a brief tour on October 13, 1971. Sovereign Grand Commander Henry Clausen, 33rd degree, visited President Gerald Ford on November 6, 1974. During their private meeting, Clausen presented Ford with a copy of his book, Clausen's Commentaries on Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. Ford received the 33rd degree through the Northern Masonic jurisdiction on September 26, 1962, becoming the second president to receive this distinct and impressive honor. The Supreme Council's final set of White House visits occurred on February 22, 1985 and February 11, 1988 to meet President Ronald Reagan. The latter visit included a group photograph on the White House grounds. The Supreme Council's visits to the White House underscore a rich and cherished tradition of the fraternity's engagement with the Chief Executive of the United States. While the frequency of these visits waned in later years, they remain a unique moment in American history, when the fraternity's influence and prestige extended into the hallowed halls of the White House and other public institutions. It also challenges an often common misconception that the craft operated as a secret or reclusive institution. As the White House visits demonstrate, the Supreme Council, and Freemasons in general, engaged in public activities and called upon the country's leaders to make their presence and Freemasonry's values known. Like and share this article, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you wish to comment, please leave one, and as a reminder, hit the notifications bell. Any accompanying photographs or citations for this article can be found in the corresponding print edition. The Scottish Rite Journal is published by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. Mark Dreisenstock, 33rd degree Managing Editor. I'm your host, Matt Bowers.